Hi everyone! We're going over Chapter 4, Theoretical and Measurement Issues in Trait Psychology. We first are going to look at the theoretical issues in trait psychology. These issues include meaningful individual differences, consistency over time and across situations, person-situation interaction, and aggregation. There are meaningful differences between individuals. This is why trait psychology is sometimes called differential psychology. People differ in the amounts of traits, and the differences can be accurately measured. According to trait psychologists, every personality is the product of a combination of a few basic primary traits. So the 5 factors, or Big Five, that we've been talking about are a good example of these basic traits that make up every individual person. If you think back to the taxonomies we talked about last week, you'll get an idea of these traits. Researchers have found that many personality traits show stability over time. The manifestation may change as far as behaviors, but the underlying trait stays the same. This idea of rank order is a key takeaway from this chapter. If you look at figure 4.1 in the chapter, you can see this demonstrated in the image. The idea of rank order is basically that while traits do change over time, your rank among others will likely stay the same. For example, in my cohort, I have a friend who is very introverted, myself who's about 50-50, though more extroverted, and a friend who is 99% extroverted. It's likely that my friend who is 99% extroverted now will not be 99% extroverted in 30 years. However, the order should not change. I will still be in the middle, while my friend who is introverted will be more introverted, and my friend who is extroverted will still be more extroverted than me. As your book mentions, the consistency over time is not debated. However, the consistency of personality across situations is debated. Most psychologists assume that there is consistency across situations. A key argument is that if situations mainly control how people behave, then the existence or relevance of traits is questionable. Hartshorne and May found low cross-situational correlations for helpfulness and self-control, though we talk later in the chapter about why this study may not be reliable since it's based on one-instance measures. However, Michelle uses this result and other research to argue that we should not try to use traits to explain behaviors, and instead should focus on situations explaining behaviors. Michelle's argument is this idea of situationism. If behavior varies across the situations, then situational differences and not personality traits determine behavior. This has led to a long-standing debate between those who strongly support traits and those who strongly support situations as influencing behavior. Since then, both have modified their views, which has led to 2 lasting changes. First, the focus on person-situation interaction, and second, the practice of aggregation. The basis of the debate that Michelle started is that there are 2 possible explanations for behavior. The first group argues that behavior is a function of personality traits. The second argues that behavior is a function of the situation. Today, we don't typically think of it as an either-or situation. The 2 views have integrated, so we now recognize that personality and situations both influence behavior. Individual differences only make a difference under certain circumstances. We also see that there are times when certain situations bring out a behavior that is uncharacteristic for a person, which is called situational specificity. The key point of this integration is that personality and situations interact to produce behavior. A lot of you have pointed out that when taking the different assessments, that the situation can really change your answer. And this is where we see person-situation interaction. So we see that sometimes there's a strong situation where most people react in similar ways. For example, you may usually be talkative, but in class you are quiet because that is what is typically expected in classrooms. So the classroom, in this case, is a strong situation. When situations are weak or ambiguous, though, personality has a strong influence. This is why the Rorschach inkblot test that we learned about a few weeks ago can provide insight into your personality. The inkblots are personally ambiguous to bring out your personality. There are 3 additional ways that personality and situation interact to produce behavior: selection, evocation, and manipulation. First, there's situational selection, where we tend to choose the situations we end up in based on our personality. Put another way, we don't typically find ourselves in random situations. So you didn't just end up in college. There is something in your personality or behavior that led to you being here. Same for if you end up in graduate school. Trust me, it's not because you love doing the work 100% of the time. The second form of person-situation interaction is evocation, the idea that certain traits evoke specific responses from others. For example, if you tend to be a friendly and agreeable person, you may evoke the same response in others. Think about random acts of kindness and how smiling at someone usually leads to them smiling back. The final form of person-situation interaction is manipulation. Instead of selecting the environment you are in, you are altering the environment that you're in. Some do this through charm, and others do it through things like the silent treatment. Another result of the debate about consistency across situations is the rise of aggregation. Aggregation is defined in your book as the process of adding up or averaging several single observations, resulting in a better measure of a personality trait than a single observation of behavior. Usually, longer tests are more reliable and better measures of traits because you see the patterns that are happening over time rather than what happens in just one instance. This is important because that one instance may not always be accurate. Say you are taking a personality test on agreeableness on a day that you happen to have had only 2 hours of sleep and no coffee, which for me is a worst case scenario. Those results may not actually reflect how agreeable you are because you may be grouchy or exhausted from the lack of sleep. If they only went based on that one measure of agreeableness, they may think that you are not agreeable, when in fact, on every other day, you're a very agreeable person. Aggregation emphasizes that traits are only a part of behavior. It also implies that traits refer to the average level of a person. Because of this, personality psychologists will never be able to predict single acts or occasions of a behavior. There are just too many factors that go into what leads to that behavior, including traits and situation. Now that we've looked at the theoretical issues, we're going to focus on the measurement issues in trait psychology. A key issue is that this approach relies on self-report measures. We've already talked about the limitations of self-report measures, so if you're having trouble remembering those, look back to Chapter 2. Another key issue for personality psychologists is being able to determine how much of a trait a person has. It helps to think of traits as dimensions along which people differ. The 3 measurement issues we will focus on are carelessness, faking on questionnaires, and integrity testing. The first key measurement issue is carelessness. Some participants are not motivated to answer carefully or truthfully. Honestly, a lot of times people just don't care. They just want to get the test over with. One way to detect this problem is to use an N-frequency scale in the test, which are items that most people answer in a particular way. If a participant answers differently than most, especially on multiple questions, this suggests carelessness. The book also mentions including duplicate items spaced far apart on the survey. These can detect carelessness if you answer the same question differently. A third way to detect carelessness is to use attention checks. Your book doesn't mention them, but they are what I have seen used most commonly, including in research that I've conducted. For these, you ask a simple question that they should get right if they're paying attention. For example, in a project I am working on now, one of the attention questions said, "For this question, select slightly agree." Another question asked what year they are taking the test. You then set a limit for how many attention checks they can miss before you exclude their data from analysis. For this project, we had 3 attention check questions, and anyone who missed 2 or more was excluded from the data analysis. The second measurement issue is faking, where you distort the answers on a questionnaire. You can fake good, attempting to appear better off or better adjusted than one is, or fake bad, attempt to appear worse off or less adjusted than one is. Researchers have come up with scales that can help catch faking. The final measurement issue is integrity testing. These tests are designed to see if a person tends to be honest or dishonest. Polygraphs were used in the past, but the issue is that they don't actually measure honesty. They test nervous reactions. You can naturally be nervous about a test if it affects your hiring decision, so you may be completely honest and still fail the test because you are nervous. On the other hand, if you rate high in psychopathy, you may not have an issue lying and therefore would not have a nervous reaction when lying, so you would pass the polygraph despite lying. Integrity tests are designed to replace polygraphs and make up for some of those limitations. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that we will see the Big Five pop up throughout class. Here you can see that the Big Five relate to integrity, with integrity being linked to a combination of high conscientiousness, high agreeableness, and low neuroticism. I found a cool study that incorporates integrity tests and the Hexaco personality that we talked about last week. This is a 2016 study titled Test of Integrity, Hexaco Personality, and General Mental Ability as Predictors of Integrity Ratings in the Royal Dutch Military Police. The researchers recruited 346 participants going through the 4-month training program. They also gathered supervisor ratings from 176 supervisors. Participants filled out 4 measures, 1 assessing Hexaco personality, 1 looking at general mental ability, and 2 integrity tests. They also gathered integrity ratings from the supervisors. The researchers found that there were significant positive correlations between supervisor-rated integrity and honesty, humility, conscientiousness, overt integrity, and personality-based integrity. They also found significant positive correlations between self-rated integrity and all integrity tests, honesty, humility, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness to experience. They did not find relationships between self-rated integrity and extroversion, emotionality, or general mental ability. This study is important because it shows evidence that both integrity tests and personality tests can meaningfully predict both self and supervisor-rated behavioral integrity. Barnum statements are statements that could apply to anyone. This video digs a little deeper into Barnum statements.
A 2015 YouGov survey asked participants in the US and Britain about their beliefs in astrology and horoscopes. 14% of Americans and 8% of Brits said that they believe horoscopes can tell you something about what will happen in the future. This might seem like a small minority, but that equates to roughly 50 million people. 30% of Americans and 20% of Britons also believe that star signs can tell you something about yourself. That's 109 million people. Whether astrology or horoscopes, fortune tellers or psychic mediums, there is a long history of people claiming to possess paranormal insight, with an even longer line of believers wanting their advice. But why might someone believe in such claims? One explanation is known as the Barnum effect, a psychological phenomenon which we have all likely fallen for at some point. The Barnum effect describes the tendency for people to accept generalized personality descriptions as accurate descriptions of their own unique personality. In a famous experiment, psychologist Bertram Forer asked 39 of his students to take the Diagnostic Interest Blank test. Following the test, each student received an individual personality sketch based on their test results, and were asked to rate on a scale of 0 to 5 how accurately it revealed basic characteristics of their personality. They were also asked to rate how effective they thought the test was in revealing personality. The students were convinced. They gave their personality sketches an average accuracy rating of 4.26, while scoring the effectiveness of the test an average of 4.31. What the students didn't know, however, was that they all received exactly the same personality sketch. Not only were they all the same, but Forer had taken the statements within the sketch from a newsstand astrology book and had absolutely no correlation with the students' test results. They included statements such as, "You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. And you pride yourself as an independent thinker and do not accept others' statements without satisfactory proof." These are Barnum statements. Statements which are vague, true for most people, and often describe positive, desirable qualities which almost anyone can relate to. Forer's experiment was concerned with the validity of personality assessments, but the Barnum effect is equally relevant in understanding beliefs in astrology and horoscopes. Here is my actual daily horoscope I found online. See how it uses vague statements, which leaves the reader to fill in the blanks with their own meaning. It also ends on a positive note, another typical trait of Barnum's statements. This may all seem obvious, but horoscopes are big business and can influence people into making poor decisions. So, if we understand why we fall victim to the Barnum effect, maybe we can be better at avoiding it. In a 1972 study, Snyder and Larson told one group of test subjects that their personality sketch was created specifically for them, and a second group was told that their sketch was generally true of people. Those who had received the personality sketches labelled specifically for them rated them as being a more accurate description of their own personalities compared with the generally true group. In another study, test subjects were presented with 12 sun sign personality descriptions and asked to choose the 4 which best matched their personality. When the descriptions were merely numbered, the test subjects had no tendency to pick the description which matched their own sun sign. However, when the descriptions were labelled with star signs, subjects were more likely to pick the description which matched with their star sign. A study by Norman Sundberg presented subjects with 2 different personality sketches, a genuine one and a fake one made up of Barnum statements. The Barnum sketches had 5 times as many socially desirable statements compared with the genuine sketches. The test subjects were asked to rate the accuracy of the 2 personality sketches, with 59% rating the Barnum sketches as more accurate. No one likes their faults being pointed out to them, and this is perhaps the most important tactic of psychics and fortune tellers: tell people what they want to hear. The Barnum effect is just one reason why people might believe in those who claim to know our deepest personality traits or what awaits us in the future. But if we stay vigilant, we can spot when someone is trying to use this trick on us. Have you ever fallen prey to the Barnum effect? Whether it's by an online personality test, daily horoscope, or a fortune teller, let me know down in the comments.
In your book, they mentioned that the Myers-Briggs often can include Barnum statements. See if you can read the results for the result that is opposite yours on the 16 Personalities website, and see if you agree or disagree with what the test says. I haven't seen any analysis of that website specifically or that measure of the Myers-Briggs, but I'm sure there are some Barnum statements that would pop up if you need to look for them. Whether someone does well in an employment setting may be determined in part by whether a person's personality traits mesh with the job requirements. For example, you may want a person who is interacting with the public often to be agreeable. Personality traits may predict who is likely to do well in a particular job, so it makes sense to select people for employment based on measures of traits. However, There are limitations and potential liabilities of using traits and tests to select employees. Lawsuits challenge the use of some tests, citing issues from discrimination to privacy concerns. So I want to quickly share 2 stories I learned from professors in a class last year on using personality in the workplace. The first story deals with extroversion versus introversion specifically. Basically, a university decided that would be best if any RAs they selected were extroverted. They wanted people that they thought would be sociable and likely to spend time with their residents. However, it backfired because there became an issue where all the extroverted RAs wanted to socialize more than do the work they needed to, so things like meetings and setting up announcement boards weren't done. Also, there became an issue of RAs partying and getting caught in underage drinking situations because they wanted to socialize. The lesson for that university was that there needs to be a balance of introverts and extroverts, and one isn't better for the job. Another story I want to share is about the Myers-Briggs specifically. The CEO of a company heard about the test and decided it was perfect. He took it and loved his results and thought they were so accurate that everyone should take it. That doesn't sound like a problem, right? Well, then he decided he wanted to only hire people that matched his personality. So if he was an ENTJ, he only wanted to hire ENTJs. Thankfully, the legal department stepped in and told him they couldn't do that, A, because the Myers-Briggs didn't directly relate to any job tasks, but B, also because potential lawsuits. The book goes through a lot of the legal issues that go into personality testing in employment settings, so I'm not going over all of the policies and lawsuits that happened, since you should have already read about them. The only thing I want to mention here is that there are 2 main concerns for an employer when using personality tests for employment selection. First, the test must predict performance on a specific job or jobs, like the one people are being selected for. And second, the test must not be biased or have undue impact on persons from protected groups, such as women and minorities. Your book provides an example of how different personality measures can be used in specific employment settings. In this case, for police officers. They describe how the MMPI, CPI, and 16 personality questionnaire are used when screening out the wrong individuals from the applicant pool. Since you've taken the Myers-Briggs test with the 16 personalities, and hopefully read this part of the chapter, I'm hoping you feel like you understand the MBTI better now. I mentioned in last week's wrap-up that the MBTI is popular in business settings, though it is rarely used in research since it's not validated or reliable. Since it's still used regularly, though, it's good to know about it. So you can see here the 8 preferences that make up the scores: extroverted or introverted, sensing or intuitive, thinking or feeling, and judging or perceiving. There is a good description of each in Table 4.1 on page 115 in your book. The MBTI was actually developed for education, counseling, career guidance, and workplace team building, which several of you actually suggested as possible uses in Assignment 3, which is awesome. It's also widely used for leadership selection, which is not what it is designed for. Some key limitations are that the scores are unreliable. For example, I switch regularly between an ESFJ and ENFJ. My result depends on the day. Another key limitation is that it's assumed that there are large between-group differences and no within-group differences. Also, no adequate tests have been done to test the predictive or incremental validity of the test, and there is not evidence to support the MBTI for selection. As I mentioned in the wrap-up video and your book mentions, the MBTI can be used for team building, career exploration, relationship counseling, and can be used to learn more about yourself and even those around you, but should not be used for selection or promotion, at least until there is more support for its reliability and validity. Your book provides the example of the Hogan Personality Inventory as a good replacement for the MBTI in selection. There is evidence to back up that this test predicts success in the company. The test is based on the assumption from Hogan that people within groups want acceptance, status and control of their resources, and predictability. The inventory then measures the aspects of the Big Five that are relevant to these motives. I want to end the lecture on this video that popped up in my YouTube feed this week that was too appropriate not to share. Disclaimer, this video is just for fun and is really not educational at all. Maybe look for some Barnum statements, but really I just chose this video because it applies the MBTI to the hiring interview process, which we shouldn't do, but since it happens, why not make fun of it a little?
I know this must be a stressful thing for you, having to hire someone new, so just let me know what I can do for you to make this as smooth as possible. Your job posting was a little bit unclear, so I went ahead, I rewrote it, made it a little more streamlined, so statistically, this should bring in much more highly qualified candidates. What's the time you've had a disagreement at work? I find that disagreements are generally improper, and as long as everyone feels good and is happy and is getting along, management can do as they see fit. What are you... Oh, sorry, I was just sketching your portrait. You can keep that. Also, I was wondering, do you have a kombucha bar for employees? Can you handle a fast-paced working environment? The speed at which you're asking me these questions makes me question how fast-paced it truly is. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? CEO of a company that will buy your company and increase profits 100-fold. What's this? It's a poem I wrote about how I feel about this job interview. It's called Locking My Own Cage from the Inside. Okay. It's actually pretty good. I see there's a gap in your employment. Why was that? Yeah, gap in my resume, just like the gap in your teeth, am I right? I'm just playing around, just kidding. The gaps in my resume, I'm sorry, I am just mesmerized by your teeth right now. What would you say are your strengths? Is my resume not detailed enough? Do I need to spell it out for you? Here, give me that. Yeah. Let me just read it to you, since apparently it's not clear enough. Okay, you're hired. We're interviewing you. Oh, sorry, what was this job for again? A payroll accountant? What the f*** was I thinking? Why should we hire you? That's kind of a dumb question. If we give you the job, how much money will you make us? Well, that depends on what you mean by money. It isn't obvious to me that we're talking about the same thing. What are your weaknesses? None. Tell me a little about yourself. Just tell me who you want me to be and I'll be that. Do you have any questions for us? Hey, forget the questions. I brought brownies. Let's just dig in.